Hello! Hiya peeps, how you doing? I am back from having some much needed time off. We had a lovely time at the wedding, and while I was supposed to be taking a rest month, somehow this always seems to happen, but I got approached for a creative project, so I'm kind of illustrating a kid's book now. On top of everything. I did get some free time though to do some stuff that I previously hadn't managed to. Speaking of which, how do you guys like the new stills? I think they look very adorable. But that said, it is now back to business, and I have a pretty important announcement to share before I start this video. Timestamps are below if you would like to skip it, but this is something very exciting for me, and I would appreciate all the help I can get to make it go well. So, I've been thinking a lot lately about my comic's current direction, and have come to a couple of difficult to admit conclusions. To put it bluntly, I don't like where the story went. I was too nervous and inexperienced to keep it on track when I first started making it, and as a result, it very much derailed from where I intended it to go. So I'm rebooting it. This means I'm going to be re-uploading the story to both Tapas and Line Webtoon, and also removing all 5 flashback chapters, which, if you haven't read it, basically amounts to the entire story so far. The Synthesis relaunch is scheduled for the 14th of October, so in the lead up to this, I am going to be promoting the comic as much as I can in order to generate some buzz, and I'm hoping that any of you guys will be willing to help me in this. I will be reformatting and redrawing the prologue to better follow the scroll format and also to help it flow a bit better. In addition to this, the flashback chapters I have currently will still be made available online, they just won't be clogging up the main comic itself. These chapters will be formatted into one big PDF and made available on Gumroad for the low price of £2.50. Please bear in mind that I do not make any money from this comic and also don't have a Patreon, because currently at this time I just don't have the capacity to consistently offer things on a monthly basis outside of what I'm already creating. So if you do happen to be generous enough to offer a contribution, that is entirely up to you, but it will be very much appreciated. So that's what we're going to try to do, and I really would dearly appreciate it if anyone could help me spread the word in any way you can. And with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Please note that nothing I say in this video is a hard and fast rule. I am not an expert, I just really like comics, and these are just some general things that I have seen people do that have worked well for the most part, compared to some of the missteps I have done over the course of my comics run. These are suggestions and nothing more. Also, please bear in mind that I will be gearing this video more towards the Webtoon format, because this is what I've found personally to be more efficient online. And as always, if you like what you see and hear, please consider subscribing. Alright, let's jump in! So, you want to make a webtoon? I think I've picked up a trick or two to help with that. I've spoken about my own process for creating a webtoon episode in a previous video that pertains to my own way of working, but that video was only in reference to A, an already published story, and B, a process that has already been tried and tested to work around my own parameters. So let's go into a few tips and tricks which I have learned along the way to help people to create a webtoon confidently and effectively that can fit within your own capabilities. And by capabilities, I am not talking about artistic capabilities. I think anyone can make a comic. I'm talking more about fitting it into a busy schedule. Also, I'm going to be using webtoon and comic pretty interchangeably here, so just bear in mind that in this context it means pretty much the same thing. So let's start with the very first and most exciting part, the story. Now, anyone who even entertains the idea of making a comic probably does so because they have their own story to tell that they have cultivated in their mind for a substantial amount of time. You have this epic story with an interesting setting, well thought out and complex characters who are all on their own journeys, and the world building is very rich, and you've been mulling it over for quite a while now, and all of these things probably will make for an amazing story. Except, doing all of that for your first ever comic is a terrible idea, and I wouldn't recommend it. And the reason for that is simply that you don't know what to expect if you've never ventured into comics before, or even what your personal process is going to be like yet. Are you sure you want to do that comic in traditional print format? Are you sure you want to do it in a fully rendered style on a weekly or bi-weekly schedule? What about other commitments like school, work, family, etc.? Are you realistically capable of working on this comic consistently with all of those factors in mind? Please note that when I bring up these factors, I'm talking mostly in reference to if you want to pursue comics semi-professionally. I think a lot of newer comic creators, including myself, tend to underestimate how much time and consideration goes into them. Sure, you might be able to do a full illustration in under an hour under normal circumstances, but are you really so sure you'll be able to do that for 15 to 30 panels per episode without suffering from extreme burnout? I know I couldn't. I'm not saying you shouldn't work on your magnum opus if you truly are dead set on doing so, but I would recommend starting with a smaller project first in order to dip your toes into the process and be able to get a feel for how much you will be able to realistically achieve in a certain amount of time. I think the last thing any of us want to do is be embarrassed about the state of their ongoing comic only a year or two down the line and feel the compulsion to constantly redraw pages to meet your own constantly evolving standards. Why can I feel people's eyes through the screen? If you're like me and you struggle with not letting your imagination run wild, then here are some suggestions on how to go about making a smaller comic first. To start, I would put a cap on the number of episodes you are planning to publish. Probably around the 5 to 10 episode range if this is indeed your very first comic. This will be a good practice for figuring out how to contain your ideas and stories so that they don't spiral and end up taking years to conclude when they should have only taken months or even weeks. Another way to do this is to use a song, movie, or other piece of creative media that you enjoy to draw inspiration from and study its formula in order to figure out the basis for your story beats. And this is also a really good way to distinguish between important story pieces and filler. As an example, I really like the band Paramore. Paramore's After Laughter album is literally what inspired me to even start Synthesis, I'm not even kidding. Give Idol Worship or Rose Coloured Boy a listen and you'll see what I mean. So using Idol Worship as an example actually, let's take a look at how the song dips up and down in terms of rhythm and intensity. As you can see, if we were to interpret the song's lyrics in a visual form, this is the general kind of story progression that you see in almost every form of media, and is what has been proven time and time again to engage with the consumers of said media, whether it be film, print, or even text. So I would heavily recommend looking into it if you want to make sure that your story is cohesive and communicates what you want it to. If you are able to divvy these ups and downs within the specified number of episodes, then this is going to give you a very solid formula of story progression without letting yourself get too carried away. The next thing I want to touch on is what I think is everyone's biggest draw towards comics, the artwork. Now, this is something that I've gone into a bit in the past, and the absolute worst thing you can do with a comic is force yourself to use a beautifully illustrated, painterly rendered art style, because there is absolutely no fucking way you are going to be able to keep that style up on a weekly or bi-weekly schedule. Unless one, you have a team working with you on it, which is very seldom the case with even most featured comics, or two, you are working on all of the pages beforehand in order to drop an entire chapter or season all at once. But I'm gonna be honest, in my opinion, the longer you leave something, the more you're gonna fret over it, so I personally think it's better to just dive in than do that, but it is your choice at the end of the day. A very vast majority of webcomic creators are independent people working on their own passion pieces, and I think printed mediums like manga and Western comics can kind of give people a bit of a skewed perspective on how much quality their online counterparts should actually include, and this can unfortunately manifest in the audience and even the creator having some impossibly high standards of production for a single person to manage. If you look at some of the webcomics online with quite intricate styles such as Ava's Demon or Countdown to Countdown, you'll see that there tends to be a few long stretches between updates because the artist needs time to draw everything. And I'm probably being a bit harsh here saying that you shouldn't do it if you really want to, because those comics by all accounts are beautiful, and I recommend them to anyone who's interested. But what I'm trying to get at is that I don't think it's a bad idea to invest in some shortcuts, because you will get burnt out trying to do all of that on your own, and it will sour your experience overall. Not only that, and this is going to sound awful, but readers will often skip a lot of panels in order to get to the good parts. I think the average time is something ridiculous, like literally 2 seconds, that the reader will pause to look at each panel if there is no text involved and if it isn't an establishing panel. So not only will you be expending a lot of energy and working yourself to the bone, but also to a lot of readers it's not even going to be worth a second glance, and as a comic creator that is pretty soul crushing to admit, I'm not gonna lie. So my biggest piece of advice, and this goes for both simpler and complex styles, is to work smarter, not harder. Give yourself more time than you actually need to create your pages so that you don't end up in a crunch if something comes up. If you are a traditional artist, I would recommend drawing your panels onto one page in order to save paper, which you can then scan in, separate, and reformat properly onto the final product. Even if you're more comfortable drawing on paper, which is absolutely fine, the unfortunate reality of webtoons is that they are overwhelmingly online, so the more that you can do on the computer, the better for you, I think. If you're a digital artist, then please hunt down any and all brushes that can help make your life easier, or make your own if you know how to. Freckles, brushes, clouds, even pre-made assets like classrooms or models are all very useful tools. And no, it is not cheating. Comics more often than not are more focused on the actual story than the artwork, despite what a lot of people will lead you to believe. And like I said before, people will skim past a lot of it. So the more time you can dedicate to that rather than painstakingly drawing every individual leaf on a tree, the better. Also, your wrist will thank you. The other thing I want to go into is formatting, and what I mean by this is things like print versus scroll form, GIFs, fonts, and basically any added elements that help tie it all together and actually make it feel like a comic. So I've had the pleasure of trying out both print and scroll forms, and can honestly say that I find scroll much easier to work with on a regular schedule. With print, you tend to use quite a bit more brain power trying to figure out things like composition and panel framing, because you only have so much space on a single A4 page or a 2-page spread, so you want to make sure that it leaves an impact. Whereas with scroll, you can have the entire focus be on a specific panel, and if you really wanted to, you could have a giant illustration that spans a good chunk of the entire episode. This isn't always the case, however, as I do read a few really good comics that use the print style online, but as someone who has admitted in the past that I tend to imagine things more like a storyboard than a comic book, scroll form just tends to be what works better for me personally. In addition to this, for those who do plan on using scroll format, if you aren't accustomed to cutting up your episodes, just so you know, both WEBTOON and Tapas have a maximum file size that they allow for each thing that you upload in an episode. Tapas allows a maximum file size of 960 by 1440, and WEBTOON allows a maximum size of 800 by 1280. To avoid getting tripped up by this, there is a website that can cut up and resize your pages for you for both websites automatically called Croppy. Croppy allows you to upload PNG, PSD, TIFF, and JPEG files, and will provide you with all the correct pages that you need to upload for your entire episode in a downloadable zip file. I will leave a link to Croppy in the description below. However, I do want to stress that if you don't place your panels correctly, Croppy can and will just cut right through the middle of them, and if you're like me and sometimes like to include GIFs in certain points, I would advise cutting up your own pages instead. I will also say though, if you want to upload print format, just know that a lot of webcomic readers online are pretty accustomed to longer episodes rather than just one page a week, so if you were planning to upload only one page, then this might be a bit of an obstacle. Not only that, but your story is going to take forever to finish, trust me. I would recommend, if you can, to draw a few pages at once and upload them as one so that you can replicate the scroll feel without having to commit to it fully. I think this will be a happy medium between doing what you originally wanted and keeping readers happy and interested. Moving on from that, let's talk about GIFs for a second, and just to get it out of the way, I just want to rant for a second about how WEBTOON doesn't allow you to use GIFs unless you're a featured comic. Okay, this is just insane. You are the largest and most successful webcomic hosting site, and you can't even dedicate a singular person in your IT department for figuring out this feature. It's bad enough that you only enabled a scheduling feature in November 2020, and you don't even get me started on notifications because there are none, still. We've been waiting forever. Oh, you want to see all the nice comments people are leaving on that episode you worked super hard on? Too bad you're not going to see them until you check the episode yourself. Happy hunting! The interface on this website is a nightmare. For readers, it's great. For readers, it's fantastic, and that's why I think it's so popular, but for creators, it's a goddamn nightmare. Right, okay, that's out of my system. Moving on from that, as I said before with Croppy, if you plan to put GIFs into your episodes, I would recommend cutting up your episodes yourself, because putting the entire episode through Croppy multiple times for the sake of making 1 or 2 panels move is kind of impractical. Not only that, with GIFs, my biggest advice is to keep them simple. Of course, having something move fluidly is cool and all, but like the file dimensions, webcomic sites like Tapas will only allow files of a maximum size, which in Tapas's case would only be 10 megabytes. So if you can, I would recommend just keeping your GIFs simple and easy, like say making a character blink or flail their arm back and forth for comedic effect. Finally, we have text. Now, text can make or break a comic's vibe, and I'm sorry guys, but Comic Sans just isn't always going to cut it. There are 2 ways that you can do your text. Make your own font, either with your own handwriting, or if you're good at this kind of thing, develop your own, or you can try to choose one that fits with the aesthetic of your story. To do that one, I would recommend looking at some free font sites. You may have a decent selection on your computer already, but it never hurts to look, especially when you can type in terms you want and have access to a far more varied selection. Just be aware that if you ever plan to monetize your comic, I would recommend to make sure to only use fonts that have been labeled as free to use for commercial use. Fonts aren't really as tightly regulated as other forms of media, but they were still designed and posted by a real person, so it's just the morally good thing to do, you know? Lucky for us, fonts are extremely easy to set up. All you have to do is download the one you want, save it to the file you want on your PC. I tend to just throw them in a file in the Documents folder, open up the fonts file and click install. Then the next time you open up your program, the font is installed and ready to use. Also with text, some people are better at it than others, but the thing that almost everyone I know does who makes a comic is to write a script. Even if you end up changing the dialogue slightly in the actual page, it will give you pointers and reminders as to what you wanted the character to actually say. And as I said in a previous video, I hardly ever stick to what is written down in my script, and that purely comes down to the size of the speech bubbles and having the text look like it fits well within that bubble. Unfortunately, the best way that I can probably advise you on this is to just dive in, and you will soon figure out how to make it fit. Just don't give up. And the final thing I want to advise on when creating webcomics is to get involved in the community. I can honestly say that the webcomic community is one of the better ones online for just being an overall more positive environment as opposed to other art-based communities that I'm not going to name. Anyway, follow your fellow creators, take note of what they're doing, how they promote themselves, ask them for advice, make friends with them, interact with them, lift them up, and cheer them on as you would want to be cheered on. There are some really invaluable resources for creators that stem purely from interacting with others who do the same thing as you, but probably the one that helped me out the most is the WEBTOON Canvas Community Discord server. This server is a fantastic resource for things like advice, collaborations, activities, and there are a ton of creators that have their own dedicated channels to their own stories. Even I have one. Creators will often hang out with each other or with readers, share their artworks, their processes, and in the voice channels you can often find people streaming themselves while drawing out their episodes. I truly think this is one of the best places I've found for just lurking like a weirdo and soaking up the more experienced artists' knowledge while also hyping them up when you can. And that, folks, is everything for today's video. I hope that it helped at least one of you in some way, and thank you so much for watching. I really hope you like the new assets, and again, if you could please help me generate some hype for Synthesis's relaunch, I would be so grateful, and I will be doing most of my promoting on both Twitter and TikTok if you want to follow me there. Yeah, I don't know how, but TikTok somehow in the span of a week ended up becoming my largest platform, but you know what, I'm gonna try and take advantage of it. Anyway, I'm gonna love you and leave you until next time. Stay safe, everyone. Bye!